Thank you for being here today. As you know, Ohio's election system is once again making headline news, and not in a good way. The big question is, why is Secretary Husted making it harder to vote when we should be making it easier? 8 years ago, Ohio made history. Our dysfunctional election system was riddled with long lines and chaos. As many as 174,000 Ohioans left their polling locations without casting their vote because of the lines, and many thousands more had their ballots thrown out for technical reasons. The margin of victory, remember, in that presidential election was only 118,000 votes. After the 2004 election, the U.S. House of Representatives Judiciary Committee investigated and issued a report on Ohio's voting problems. The Ohio House, under the direction of then-Speaker John Husted, to his credit, passed now State Senator Edna Brown's bill, House Bill 234, creating no-fault early voting. In 2008, an estimated 93,000 Ohioans voted early on a Saturday, Sunday, and Monday before Election Day. Hundreds of thousands voted early in person over the 35-day period preceding the election. Large urban counties that had obscenely long lines in 2004 were able to handle the record numbers of voters, of young people voters, minority voters, and low-income people who turned out in 2008. Now, Secretary Husted has trimmed back early voting hours and weekend hours across the board. He said he's leveling the playing field for voters by requiring all county boards to have the same early vote hours. Sadly, that is just not true. Setting uniform hours treats all county boards the same, but it treats voters unequally and unfairly. Secretary Husted's edicts will result in disparities, bringing back long lines in large urban counties. For example, in 2008, both Cuyahoga and Warren County saw 8% of their votes cast early in person. But because Cuyahoga is so much larger, it averaged about 1,500 in-person votes a day, compared with Warren's average of 241 votes a day. Even with the expanded early voting hours, by the way, some voters in Cuyahoga had to wait 3 hours to cast their votes. In comparison, Warren generally had very short lines. Now both counties are being forced to abandon weekend early voting hours for so-called uniformity. We have a display that shows the huge differences in numbers of early voting, of early in-person voters in a sampling of counties studied by the Northeast Ohio voter advocates. Take Jackson County, for example, 933 early voters in 2008. Compare that to Columbiana County, 1,897 early voters in person in 2008. Fairfield County, 4,246 early voters. Lake County, 10,194 early voters. Montgomery County, 28,000 early in-person voters. And Cuyahoga County, 54,325 early in-person voters. Counties are not the same. There are big differences in the numbers of voters. And by the way, of those 54,000 early voters in person in 2008, around 20,000 of those voted during hours that are no longer available in 2012, thanks to Secretary Husted's edict. 20,000 voters. How can Secretary Husted think that those folks will not cause longer lines by squeezing into fewer available hours? Cuyahoga County has over 1.2 million people. Take Morgan County, for example, 15,000 people. Yet those same two counties each have one polling place open for early in-person voting. Treating election boards equally treats voters unequally and unfairly. And who suffers? It's minorities. It's the working poor. They'll face much longer lines. All voters will face longer lines, especially in those large urban counties. It's those folks whose votes are being suppressed. So, again, the question to Secretary Husted, why are you making it harder to vote this year?